Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for joining this webinar on practical implementations and experimentations of AI in fundraising. I'm just going to sort of set the scene a little bit. We've only got an hour or so. So first, I'm going to kick off with a welcome, a little bit of additional context. Then talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about AI, experimentation in AI, and how we might go about building tools to practically collaborate together and achieve some difference in this space. I'm going to show some live use cases, and I've got the joy, of course, of doing some little demos live and hoping that they do the right thing. So yeah, wish me luck with that, but talk through a few use cases within this fundraising space, which are potentially really quite, in some cases, quite transformational. Then come on to future directions, and then finally close with some Q&A. Please don't feel the need to hold questions until the end, but I probably won't pick them up as we go along. So if questions come up, drop them into the Q&A section on the bottom bar. You should see a Q&A, and we'll pick them up towards the end. As I said, we've only got an hour or so. Typically, a kind of full-blown workshop might cover, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, that kind of thing. So it's going to be fairly whistle-stop. It's kind of hard to know exactly where to pitch this. I'm sure many of you will have played with some of the AI tools that are out there. In some cases, you might be quite experienced with them. So apologies if it's too slow, too fast. I hope you're still able to get some useful takeaways. Please do feedback how you found it, especially if you found it a little bit too hard or too easy to follow, so we can improve it for next time. Now, when I'm talking about AI, I'm mostly referring to the most recent generation of AI tools, which we collectively know as LLMs, large language models. For the purposes of many of the demos, I'll be using the tools provided by OpenAI, so primarily ChatGPT and its derivatives. But you can do very similar things with many of the LLMs you'll have access to. So just, if you're not heavily using ChatGPT or OpenAI, please do feel free to use whichever tools you're using, and you'll see fairly similar kind of results. So before we go any further, the first thing I just wanted to talk about very briefly was what is all this AI stuff? It kind of in some ways feels like it might have blindsided us in the space. It's come, from mid-pandemic to barely existing to now being a kind of fairly integral part of many people's professional lives. It's certainly being talked about quite heavily, even if not yet used at the same kind of level as it's being talked about. It can feel quite magic and quite intimidating and quite odd, actually, when you open it up and it seems to do something that might otherwise take humans minutes, days, hours, weeks, months. What this stuff really is predictive models at its core. So not too dissimilar to the kind of predictive text that you might find on your mobile phone and might have been using for many years, of course. It's predictive models that look at the context, so the person who's interacting with it, the context in the world, the context in the news, the data that's being provided, other bits of contextual information, and the surrounding text. So the prompt that you give it, the text you give it, and what it's currently come up with. And then essentially using a complex algorithm to just predict what the next word, sentence, paragraph, etc. is likely to be, to find the best fit for what it is that it looks like you're looking for. It's really tempting, therefore, to kind of think of it on the one hand like it's just an algorithm, on the other hand like it's a person or an assistant of some kind. And of course, really, it's kind of it's kind of neither, because it takes so much context from what you give it, and it's using all of that context all of the time to settle on better and better outcomes for you, as long as you continue to prompt it. In a sense, it becomes an extension of the way that you are communicating with it. So an extension of the way that you write and speak and talk, as well as the contextual data you feed it. So it's a little bit more than just an algorithm. But it certainly isn't an assistant. And I'll show you some examples a little bit later as to, it isn't thinking. it isn't looking very deeply at knowledge and structured information. It's not very good at being offended or being happy. So it certainly doesn't interact like people do. So there's some really sort of key differences. And you'll find if you start using this stuff heavily that, of course, you start to anthropomorphize it. You start to treat it or think of it a little bit like a human. And that's inevitable because it's designed to look and feel like that. It's a chat interface. It's a voice interface. It's designed to make you feel comfortable using it. Large language models cover a big chunk of the stuff that we have that essentially really has become worth talking about, in a sense, transformational in the space. That's everything from ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and there's many other systems out there, as I said. Fairly agnostic to which ones we use. Many of them are just gradually competing to be slightly better than the other one at any point in time. So you can use whichever ones you think are best suited to you and your organization. In terms of this talk itself, I'm focusing on the area where I feel like, in a sense, my background and Hubbub's background meshes most accurately with kind of these tools. So specifically on fundraising, really ideally in the education space. I'm originally a technologist, so I have a computer science degree from Cambridge originally. So I've got a background in how these systems sort of work underneath. I've also spent the last 14 or 15 years developing products in this space. And so feel like I've got a fairly good understanding of some of the problems we face in fundraising, both on the mass giving side and as you step up to kind of mid-level and major level giving, some of the challenges around the work that we do in the space, around scale, around speed, insight generation, and in many cases around creative. So, copy, tailoring, personalization, segmentation. So yeah, that's very much the focus. From a sort of high-level impact perspective, if you look at the world towards the back end of 2024, around 2/3 of organizations out there in the whole commercial world, around 2/3 are using this generative AI, these LLMs, in at least one business function. It's probably higher than that now because that was McKinsey data from the back end of 2024. But less than the third, so I think around 27-28%, described anything that they did as structured, so using structured adoption practices. I think, it's hard to get reliable data on the fundraising space. There is a brand new initiative from the University of York, which I'm very proud to be an advisory board member of, which is the Centre for Digital Innovation in Philanthropy. Wonderful new initiative led by the team at York in collaboration with their development and alumni relations team, which is hoping to answer some of these questions about, how is the sector engaging, how are they using it? So we will have a lot more data, and there is indeed a report that just got launched a couple of weeks ago. So please do go and have a look because there's some really interesting data in there. But the interesting thing that's changed here, and one of the reasons why adoption has been so fast, is that these are not gate-kept models. So these tools that we use, these things like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, etc., as well as a large number of open source models, they're making the individual experimentation cost close to zero. So any one of us, whether or not our organization believes in it, has signed up to it, has researched it, has issued guidelines or governance, compliance information, we can still pick it up and we can still try it. And what that means is that we've got people all over the sector and space doing all manner of experiments in how to make this work well. What we have a lot less of is structured use, structured adoption in a way that means other people can learn. Now, if I go back 3 or 4 months, I gave a little talk at a case event where I essentially encouraged everybody to just keep experimenting, keep playing, keep experimenting. And I think I've since thought about that and caveated a little bit. So experimentation is brilliant when it's done in a kind of repeatable scientific way. Experimentation, when it's us exploring on our own in a fairly dark room with no idea what other people have done before, that could be a little bit more dangerous because it's hard for us to know whether what we produced was a good outcome, a bad outcome, whether anybody else will ever be able to repeat it or use it. And it's just really hard to get the kind of institutional benefit from individual experimentation unless we do it in a scientific way. And so the very first thing I wanted to say is whenever we do experiments, including the kind of experiments and demos I'm going to show you on this workshop, we need to look at it as if it's a scientific experiment. So what were you trying to achieve? What tools did you use to do it? What worked, what didn't? What's next? And how might you share that information? Because really, there are organizations out there now, commercial, technical, sales-led organizations, where they're starting to mandate the use of AI in people's everyday jobs without yet necessarily even having a pact for how to use it. So this is one of those things that's just going to become a skill we're all expected to have, learn, adapt to in the same way. I think in many ways, email, the internet, mobile phone usage and things like that. These are things that just kind of, these are kind of, in some ways, so easy to pick up that they become insidious little bits of our job that we kind of have no choice but to engage with. And one of the things that is missing at the moment is any kind of a structured way to pick this stuff up. And so there's this kind of encouragement of just experiment, just play, just try and do it. But self-directed learning in this space can miss huge amounts of valuable experience from others. So with that in mind, the most important thing is to write down these experiments. And when I say write down these experiments, but I get this kind of question like, but what, but what does that look like? What does it mean? One of the things that we've developed internally at Hubbub, which I'm going to share, just give me a second, I'll share my screen. Is a little internal worksheet. So we use this internal worksheet to document the experiments that we're doing and to answer those kind of questions so that we can share internally and potentially externally what we've learned, what's worked really well, what hasn't, how things could be improved next time. So little introduction for the worksheet, roughly how to use it, some instructions as to how you might go about storing them and sharing them, and then the kind of questions that we'd ask. So problem or opportunity, tools used, prompt input, the output you got, what worked, what didn't work, the improvements made, the outcome, what next, and then share and reflect. Now, this is important because as you, as an individual experiment, you're going to want to go back to some of the things that you've done, that you've achieved and that have worked really well for you, and learn from some of those that didn't. But more than that, there'll be others in your teams and others in your organizations that will want to do that too. And as you each experiment, building up a little library of these worksheets with all of the things that have been done, all the tools that have been used, will allow you not just to share them and read them and see what other people have done, but even start to index them and search them. You can even use them and input them into other AI tools to say, tell me more about, has anybody in my organization done X before? Can I go and learn from them? And if we start to build this repository of both successful and failed experiments, we start to build knowledge, internal knowledge in the organization. And knowledge is really, in this case, the basis of anything. I come back to that point I made about structured learning. If you want people to have an adoption curve that's so anything other than pretty random, if you want people to be able to pick these tools and processes up, if you want to be able to learn in a structured way, having knowledge that is institutional about what's worked, what hasn't, and where that knowledge sits is the absolute core of it. So if you want this worksheet, drop us a note. It's fairly simple. You could create one yourself, but if you want a copy of this, email me, ai@hubbub.net will reach me, and I'll drop you over a copy of it by email. Now, I think without further ado, I'm going to jump into a few live demos. So examples of things that I would say constitute precisely the kind of experiment I'm talking about. So use cases within the fundraising world where we can pick these tools up, we can do something, we can iterate it a little bit, and we can get to some kind of a result. Not all the results will always be spectacular. And they're all slightly different each time you run them. So when I do this live, I'm not expecting the results to be exactly the same as the one that I tested. So I'm going to need to be a little bit flexible also in how I interpret the results and how we respond. So the first thing I was going to mention was using some of these tools to do tailoring of specific appeals. So it's quite usual for us to produce, obviously in this space, a really compelling case for support. In many cases, we can spend weeks, months crafting a perfectly wordsmithed case for support for a particular initiative, appeal, campaign, etc. One of the things we'd really like to be able to do with that case for support, having written it, is now have a version of it that's appropriate for different segments, audiences, or individuals even. And that, if you're using a conventional copywriting approach, either externally or internally, is either very expensive in money or very expensive in time. It's also quite inflexible, because if you're sitting there trying to perfectly craft something for a particular email, it may not be right for social, even if it's great for that audience. So you then end up with this kind of hierarchy of cases for support. And that's great if they're going to sit there for a long time. But if somebody now wants to tweak the top one and change a pillar up there, everything else now has to change, which can, again, get very complicated. So this is an ideal use case for some of the generative AI tools that are out there. So this is a largely lifted case for support. If you wrote this and you're on the call, sorry for lifting it, but I lifted it to show you what you can do with this kind of thing. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to ask ChatGPT to rewrite this bursary appeal for a parent audience, keeping the core purpose intact, but reflect appropriate tone, emotional drivers, and familiarity. So let's see what this does. So just for what it's worth, this is a nice, really nicely written appeal. It contains a lot of the appropriate fundraising language, like lots of we language. It hasn't got a lot of structure to it, so there's no sort of internal headings and things like that, but it's got enough narrative and enough context about what the appeal is to be able to quite quickly find enough angles to rewrite it. So just give me a sec and I will lift it into the prompt. There we go. So as you can see, this is now acting as a human. It appears to be typing out the text for me. Again, it's really just taking the context, which is this information above, this appeal language. What I asked it to do, this first bit, rewrite the following appeal for a parent audience, keep the core purpose intact. And this is also using some examples of who I am. So I've also tailored this version of ChatGPT to have a couple of examples of who I am, a couple of things about who I am in terms of the style. So you'll see probably we're going to get this in UK English only, probably not in US English, which is something I've told it to do. So they've rewritten it nicely for us. This is for the parent audience, and it decided, because I asked for parent audience, that it was going to use more emotionally resonant and accessible language while maintaining the strategic intent and core messaging. So you'll see, as parents, we all want our daughters to be stretched, inspired, and supported. For many bright, ambitious girls, the cost puts it in reach. So it's been rewritten really quite nicely for the appeal. There's a few things in here that I don't really like. In particular, there are some things in here where I don't think they really belong in these kind of things. Big telltale signs that's been written by AI are these long dashes, these kind of M dashes you see in there. ChatGPT absolutely loves putting these in. And so one of the things that I would normally do is go and clean all of this up. Of course, you don't actually have to clean it up yourself. You can ask it to. So rewrite this, removing the emojis. I don't really like those other icons because I can't really use them very well. Moving the emojis and removing the M dashes. So it will now rewrite that for me, taking out the bits I don't like. Interestingly, and this is interesting, it's inferred from these instructions that I want a more formal tone. So this is a point where you need to be, you need to start thinking quite hard about your prompt. So I'm not going to run a whole prompt engineering task here, but read what it's telling you it's doing, because each time you ask it to tweak something, it might change slightly more than you asked it to. looking at this, they've managed to retain, a lot of the lovely, friendly we language, and it's taken out the bits I didn't like. So that's great. Now, again, most people would stop at this point. It's very common to stop at this point. It did offer in the previous version whether or not I wanted a shorter version for a newsletter or social media format. It's well worth, when you do these experiments, seeing what it will produce, because it can inspire your thinking in other ways. So could I have 3 social media posts for X, Facebook, LinkedIn? Please keep them short and professional. So now we will get things that are tailored ideally for those particular channels. Now, we might still not use them on those particular channels, but we've got something for X here, which is really nice short format, something for Facebook, something for LinkedIn. And now it's offering to do image caption text or design suggestions to accompany them. So again, these are the kind of things where I would suggest, let's have a go. Yes, please. And let's see what it manages to do. So you'll find then when you document what you've managed to achieve, you'll get some really good examples of things that you could come up with. Now, I was hoping it would give me some images here. It hasn't. It's given me a description of what it intends to generate as the images so far. And now it's offering to mock them up. So yes, please mock one up. There we go. So this is DALL-E. This is ChatGPT's image generation technology, which is integrated into the chat, and it will now mock something up. I think this is probably going to be wildly not right, because I didn't even give it any input as to the school's logo, branding, colors. I gave it nothing other than the text. So if it gets anything like something that might be appropriate, I'd be very surprised. Normally, you'd feed it some more the school's brand guidelines, some example images and that kind of stuff if you want the images to work well. So we'll just give that one a moment, see how far it gets to. If you like, in the meantime, whilst that's putting something together, which actually it doesn't look terrible, it would be really interesting if you just drop into the chat. Are there any particular segments that you currently work with where you feel it would work really well to have tailored asks, personalized asks, and why? You know, like in this space, we have sometimes segmented asks. It's quite common, but we often do quite a lot of stuff where we send the same kind of things to lots of different people. And yet there's this kind of, I'm just looking at that image it's created, and I'm quite I'm quite impressed. So it's great that we can get to some images that you know, that look and feel relevant. That's a lot better than I expected. See some kerning issues. This is really common in image generation, that it makes a bit of a mess of some of the typography and fonts. So you'll typically find if you are going to use it for image generation, you probably want to make it so that it's just doing image generation. It's not also overlaying the text on top. You probably want to do text on top yourself in other tools like Canva or things like that. But yeah, I'd be really interested if you feel like there are particular audiences you work with where there's an opportunity to do this kind of tailored appeal. And the example here, I asked it to do it for a parent audience, but if you were running something like a Giving Day appeal, this is a great way of taking one case for support and then generating, you know, 5, 6, 10 different segment emails, essentially the copy and the content for the different segments. So parents, alumni of different generations, existing donors or non-donors, recent leavers, you know, staff, former staff, you know, there are all these different audiences you want to speak to, and you probably want to use different tone, different language, slightly different stories, but still reflect the overall case for support. And instead of having to write, you know, these 10, 15, 20 different variants, you could use the tools to generate some of them, at the very least as a starting point. So the next one I wanted to do a little demo of is donor kind of briefing profiles. Like, we've all been to these events, where there's a bunch of great people in the room, and I need to know enough about them to strike up a conversation, at the very least to hold my own in a conversation. And this is the case for events. It's also the case when we're doing like major donor fundraising trips, or we're going overseas, where we'll often be in a reception room or an event, or we're about to go into another meeting, a series of meetings with people, and we need to really know a bit more about them, who they are. With this in mind, these tools are, again, really good at generating you simple summaries from whatever data you've kind of got on hand, stuff in the CRM, giving histories, LinkedIn profiles. So I'm going to give you a little input example. I'm going to use myself, because if I'm going to feed it real data, I'd much rather I feed it my own data, so that there's no kind of no issues using data. And I'm going to ask it to generate a little profile for me, and you could do this, of course, for each of your each of the people you're going to meet. So use the following data: LinkedIn profile, past donation spreadsheet, relevant news articles, create a one-page donor briefing for a meeting, include background, giving history, and recommended talking points. All donations listed made to different initiatives at Bristol Grammar School. I have, of course, made a fake giving history here, just so you know. This is not my entire history of giving. So I've given it a spreadsheet, a CSV file, and I've given it a LinkedIn profile export. You can export the LinkedIn profile of anybody that you're connected to. There's a little more button and a download as CSV, download as PDF, and it'll give you a PDF of that person's profile, which is all I've used here. I've just used the one from my own profile. So let's see how we do. Great. So here's a one-page profile for meeting me based on my LinkedIn profile and my past donation history. I've got good background, looks relevant and accurate, giving history, strategic considerations. This is great. It's a little bit longer than what I had in mind. Recommended talking points. I think this is kind of cool. This is great. Now it's offering a version of this formatted as PDF or as a Word document. Wonderful. I might ask it to make a short version. But before we do that, I just want to flag something. This giving history is not what was in the CSV. It isn't just not what's in there. It's wildly different. It misses a ton of these gifts. The dates are all made up. The things we're giving to, even those kind of look semi-made up. For some reason, rather than saying I didn't read that tool, or I couldn't read that, I didn't read that sheet, or I couldn't read that sheet, it's decided to simply manufacture new data. And the simplest explanation of this is that in the context of what I asked it to do, it treated the data in the spreadsheet I uploaded really not as a record or as knowledge that had to be preserved intact, but instead it treated it as data that was going to exemplify the kind of answer it should provide. And this is what I mean by this. These tools are nowhere near like having an assistant, because this human assistant would never, ever do this. Would just look at the file and go, oh, great, some examples of gifts. I'll make my own ones up. But these tools, what they'll do is they'll look at this and say, oh, I understand there's a set of gifts and they have a date and they have amounts and designations. I wonder what, based on Jonathan's other inputs, his gifts might have been. So it's going to make some up, and it's going to make some up that it thinks are most relevant for me in the context. So if you want to fix that, first thing I would say is always read the output you're being given. It's much better at taking text input in attachments than it is structured data, especially numerically structured data in spreadsheets. There's a good chance it just won't read it at all. And the easiest way I found of solving that problem within ChatGPT is to simply copy paste your data from the spreadsheet into the prompt instead. So if you tweak your prompt a little bit so that you say, let's just do a new one, see whether it does any better. So I'm going to pop in the data as a table. This is literally copy pasted straight out the CSV. And then I'm going to give it the same prompt again and the same PDF. Past donations below. Relevant news articles, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll give it the PDF again. And here we go. So, of course, this is me doing a live demo, so it'll now do the wrong thing. But in the tests I did in advance, this is exactly what happened, and it managed to get the giving history right when I did it like this. It's important, right? Because it's the kind of thing you're about to walk in to a meeting with. So it's summarized 2003 to 2005. It's got all of the more recent gifts in. It's got correct gifts more recent. So this is the table we gave it, which is great. And it's also been able to extract some slightly more interesting patterns from that data because it's used the real data. So again, that's a good thing. Recommended talking points, got slightly different ones because it's updated that on the basis of it, the things I've given to. And these are relevant. I mean, like when I read this in advance, these are the kinds of things that I might actually be interested in supporting. So this probably took what would have been at least a few hours of work for somebody doing event profile, creation or research on potential prospects or donors into minutes. Okay, but obviously was a bit error prone. Quite easy to miss the fact that it had just completely misrepresented the gift history. So I'd like this summarized into cue card format. Let's see. So again, I feel like where we get the very best out of these tools is when we think about how we're going to use the output and then try to get it to give me exactly what I want iteratively. So constantly trying to iterate and improve. And here you go. I'm getting stuff that's much more like a cue card. A lot briefer. Still probably too long from my perspective. If I was using it in an event, I'd probably want something a bit shorter. So again, I'd keep iterating until you got exactly what you wanted out of this example. Now, like I said, I've used primarily ChatGPT when we're doing these tools. Other tools, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, all these various tools that we've got out there, they can all do the same kind of thing, and they'll all have their own problems, right? And they'll all have their own ways of fixing them. So this is a perfect example of where I would be documenting, this is what I did. I discovered that it basically ignored my CSV file and generated its own gifts. And that's a learning that somebody else on your team might miss if you haven't documented it and ensured that it's something that you do differently next time. The next demo I want to do is, again, we're going to use ChatGPT. We're going to do something that is in a sense a bit more of a modern use case. So if you've run a telephone fundraising appeal before, we've almost certainly had structured, a kind of fairly unstructured and some structured caller notes from successful calls. If you're running it, depending on the kind of VoIP software you're using, you might even have call transcripts. That would be a fairly modern way of doing it. Those call transcripts are long. They contain lots of pertinent information. They're very easy to miss important details from, especially if a caller is trying to do the call and then live summarize those caller notes into actions and into a consistent format. So what I've done is I've generated an anonymized transcript of a fundraising call, a successful one, I might add, with a donor, between a caller and a donor. And I'm going to ask ChatGPT to take our transcript and produce me a summary of this call. So there's our call transcript. Again, if you're using any kind of meeting software for calls, you get a transcript. This webinar will have a transcript at the end of it. So this has become quite a common way of doing it. And I'm going to ask it to reformat the following unstructured donor call notes into a consistent format used in our CRM, extract key outcomes, tone indicators, next steps, and summary. So this is so that I can consistently get the same information out of each of the calls, irrespective of which caller did it, how they wrote their notes, whether it was a transcript or whether it was handwritten notes, essentially, or hand-typed notes. I want to be able to get it into the right place, into the right structure. So here, now we've got a call log, some interesting data, key outcomes, next steps. This is great. So this is really important, right? Because in next steps, we've got, they're interested in attending the June afternoon tea, the September breakfast event, some volunteering opportunities. And we've got to email them a donation link for fulfilling their gift, because they said no to a £15 gift, but yes to a £5 a month gift. And we want to make sure we send them a link, because they did say that they didn't want to do it on the call. And this is our next step of action. So this is great, but what we've got here is text input. And actually, we really want it. Oh, well, look, it's beaten me to the punch this time. So would you like this output formatted into a downloadable CRM entry template? Yes. Yes, I'd like this summarized into a downloadable CSV, please. I said, please. Turns out it's more polite with you when you say please, but that's kind of up to you really. If you want to say please and thank you. So easy to anthropomorphize the tools and be friendly with them. So here, one of the reasons it's taking a little bit longer than it usually does is it's actually created a computer program. So it's used generative AI to generate the program in Python, almost always. Then it's run Python and use that Python to create the CSV. So it's run a program to make your CSV. So it's written a program, run the program, and then generated your CSV, and then given you a link to it. And this is fine, but I might want to check that. I might just not trust that CSV. So can you show me the table in the chat, please? Because I want to check that that's got all the data we wanted. And I also don't want to have to load up a CSV in a separate window for you and share it. So let's see what we've managed to do here. So now we've got a CSV. It's actually arranged. It's a table. It's arranged vertically for some reason. So we would probably want to tell it to do it horizontally in the next iteration. It's got lots of different sections and section headings. The thing is, if you tell it, I don't want these 20 odd, 18 odd rows. What I want is, I only want call summary, tone indicators, next steps, and event interest. That's what you'll get. So the more structured the format is, the more structured the instructions are that you tell it, the more deterministic the outcome is. So otherwise it will start to guess and interpret what you want. It's actually not bad. And if you want to see the full entries, you can sort of select them and it will show you at the bottom what's actually in there. So yeah. Right, final little bit of demoing, because I'm just very conscious of time. It's too, yeah. A little bit of, if those who joined the webinar last week will have seen that you can use some of these tools to do voice-based interactions. So they can respond in real time to the way that you are talking, what you're talking about, the content, the topics, and you can even use them, you can tell them to act as if you are a donor, act as if you are a volunteer, act as if you are Bill Gates, act as if you are somebody within our audience that's either real or abstract. And then as fundraisers, we or our student callers, if we're running telethons, can practice those interactions, the awkward conversations, the easy ones, the big asks, the small asks, as well as a number of other rather more awkward interactions that happen when we are picking up the phone or when we're calling prospects or donors. And I wanted to show you a couple of these. They're very short videos of, because it's really hard to do this in real time on the call, on the webinar. I'll show you a couple of videos of me interacting with these agents. You ought to be able to hear the audio on here, so I'm hopeful that you can, because it is shared. If not, I'll drop them around afterwards and put it in the chat if you can't, and I'll drop these around afterwards as examples. Okay, we're going to give David a ring. David is probably not going to be very happy with us, because David is a 45-year-old alumnus frustrated about being contacted again for fundraising, and he's going to let us know. So let's have a go, see if I can handle this one.
Hello.
Hi, is that David?
Yes, it is. What is it this time? Another fundraising call, I presume?
Well, hi, David. Yeah, I'm calling from the University of Winchester, calling as part of our annual alumni fundraising appeal. And really just to reconnect and share what's happening at the university.
Look, I appreciate the intention, but I'm really not interested in these calls. Is there any way I can be removed from your calling list? I'd prefer not to be contacted again for fundraising purposes.
I completely understand, David. I'm really sorry you've been contacted again. I'll make sure to flag that straight away, and I'll have your details removed from the fundraising call list.
Thank you. And I apologize for being grumpy. I realize you're just doing your job, but these calls have been quite a nuisance. I appreciate your understanding and action.
Not at all. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me and wishing you all the very best, David. Hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you. You too. Goodbye.
So, not bad. We interacted. As you can see, the tools are going to take a little bit of work because at the moment, they are having a conversation. They're responding to what I'm saying. It's not perfect. It sounds a little bit more like an email, right? So like they're speaking in slightly longer sentences, not quite as much intonation, but you could at least hear there that David was annoyed. It wasn't just the language, it was the inflection and the tone. And this stuff is only going to get better and better as the models develop and improve over time. Just show you another one that's a little bit more positive to our cold call. And again, I won't necessarily play the whole thing for you in this case.
Okay, now we're going to try and call James, who follows university updates but has never given before. He's open to a discussion, and he's got some fairly specific instructions about how to engage. So let's see how this one goes.
Hello.
Hi, my name's Jonathan. I'm calling from the University of Winchester, where I'm currently a student. I'm calling as part of our alumni appeal to share some news and hear how your time at Winchester has shaped you. Do you have a moment to speak?
Hi, Jonathan. Sure, I've got a moment. It's great to hear from the University of Winchester. What news do you have to share?
Oh, brilliant. Well, I wondered if we could find out a little bit more about your time there first, actually, if you can. Like, I'm in my final year studying history. It's been amazing to hear from graduates like you as part of the appeal who've gone on to do such great things. Can I ask a little bit about what you've been up to since graduating?
Of course. After graduating, I ventured into the world of marketing. It's been quite the journey, with its fair share of challenges and successes. I currently work as a marketing director, and I've kept in touch with the university's updates. How about you? How has your experience been studying history?
I've really enjoyed it. I think, modern history.
I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing. I didn't study history and I was totally lost in that conversation. And I think this really, from my perspective, it highlighted how easy it is to not be prepared for these conversations. If you're a student caller and you're picking up the phone for the first time, having practiced that 5, 10, 15 times in advance means that your script about yourself, about your appeal, the kind of things you wanted to talk about becomes so much easier and more comfortable. We've also tested this tool with it pretending to be, Bill Gates and other major donors with a lot more context. And it's kind of interesting, again, how it shows you the gaps in what you're ready to talk about. With essentially the fake Bill Gates asking very detailed questions about the impact of his last gift and things like that. So these are things where, with a bit of use and a bit of training and a bit of improvement, they could really make a difference. Now, future directions. I did say I was going to speak briefly about this. I want to make sure we've got a bit of time for Q&A. So I think that there's 3 really important things that are going to happen over the next few years. Okay, and the first is that we need to work out how we close the skills gap here, right? And the skills gap is all about structured shared experimentation. So it's, what are we using, what's the experiment we're doing, and how do we learn from that and share those results? Because I come back to that point I was trying to make earlier, which is, if you've got a repository of experiments, and whether that's within your organization or with the sector as a whole, then we can learn from it. If you don't, if everybody's experimenting on their own, in essentially it's invisible. And We will never be able to build training programs. We'll never be able to onboard people to use these tools at our organization without those kind of experiments being documented. So again, drop me an email if you want that worksheet. If not, create your own. But definitely make sure that you do start to document these experiments, even in a very simple way. So that's the first thing, skills gap, and it's build a knowledge base, because without it, we'll never get the training and the practice. The second thing is tools integration. So this is one of the things that I think is very much on people like us as a vendor, as a software vendor in the space, integrating more and more of the tools like voice training that I just showed you, like insight generation. So if you're running a telephone appeal, for example, how is it going? You know, what segments are responding best? Which of your fundraisers are managing to perform best with particular segments or particular asks? Running a giving day, what are the prevailing, you know, donor messages being left on the donor wall? Is there anything in terms of the email copy that appears not to be resonating? So building in the AI insights generation that surfaces the kind of, you know, you might want to change X, you're doing really well at Y, in a really simple way. Because I think that one of the problems we've got with data at the moment, especially data in digital world, is that it's overwhelming. We've got so much of it, and some of it's really high quality, some of it's really low quality. But what often as fundraisers, what we really need is the insights. What do I do next? What do I do tomorrow? You know, what can I influence now? And these tools are really good at surfacing that kind of insight. And again, I think that a lot of that is going to come down to the tools, the CRMs, email providers, the platform providers, to do some of that. And the third big thing that's going to change is what I would call contextual co-pilots. Like people would call these in the commercial space, you're seeing the word agentic kicked around. I struggle with that word because I like agents, but agentic sounds like a really new and fuzzy word to me. But essentially, these are things that are being trained. They're like little chat GPTs or little agents for a very specific purpose, typically trained on your own data, your own documents, your own repository of information. They can be internal facing or external facing. Think of them like really powerful chatbots that are trained on your knowledge base. And these can become little assistants for your planning, for your communications, for your research. But they're not just like using ChatGPT like I just did. They're using ChatGPT, but they've got the entire repository of your last, 25 years worth of donor reports. They've got your current plan, strategic plan. They've got access to the academic structure in your university or your, essentially the teaching body. They've got all your policies and information. They know who your vendors are. So this kind of information, so you can start to ask really, really intelligent questions. That sounds really complicated, right? It sounds like a thing that's out there in the future. And reality is it's not. So if you look, I essentially dropped into ChatGPT's custom GPT builder, the last 3 PDF accessible reports from the University of Oxford. Sorry if anyone from here is anyone's on the call, but they're on your website. So the ones that were on the website took the last 3 and essentially trained a custom GPT on those 3 reports. And what we have here is a internal tool that supports Oxford fundraisers with campaign insights and data from recent philanthropy reports. It took about 6 minutes to build this. It's all available through the tools if you sign up. And I can ask it questions like, what's the status of the Schwartzman Center project? Can you summarize recent major gifts? Let's have a go at that one. See what it comes up with. I haven't actually tested this, so I'm hopeful this doesn't go horribly wrong. There you go. So need to double check, of course, that these are right, but I have no reason to believe that these are not right. And if someone's from Oxford and spots something that's not true, please do put it in the chat. But in theory, this should have come from all from the documents that we put in. It shouldn't be making anything else up. One of the reasons I find this stuff incredibly powerful is that if you train it with the right set of data, you can ask it some really quite powerful tools. So can you make me a mini training course for a new fundraiser starting at the university? right? So all of a sudden, like we've gone from here's our existing like donor reports to let's build a whole course with modules and stuff off it, and it's going to give me the structure. It could also give me all the content. So this could take a while for it to generate. But you know, it's this kind of thing where, you know, if you think about the time it takes to onboard new fundraisers, this makes a massive difference to the ability to do that. And I've only given it 3 reports. Like if you give it the last 25 years, you look across the colleges, you look across all of the stuff that's public facing, current strategic plan, current fundraising plan, the structure of the department, the bios, all of that kind of stuff. And then people can essentially start to ask questions. Now, if you put the 2 things I've suggested doing, the scientific experimentation and the custom GPTs together, you then end up essentially with all the experiments people are doing with a tool that lets you query them, essentially, a thing that lets you say, tell me who else within the organization has tried X, has tried Y. And again, it gives you like a really good basis to work. So I wanted to get into some Q&A. I would just say, we are actively at Hubbub, we're actively trying to build a community around this work. We're hoping to put a conference together later in the year around some of the work in fundraising. We're looking at some short courses. We're also partnering with a number of HE institutions in particular, but also some independent schools to test and implement some of this work in the real world. So if this is stuff you'd like to do, get involved in, get early access to, please do email me, ai@hubbub.net. Those emails will come straight through and we can pick up the conversation and hopefully get started. So yeah, are there any questions in either the Q&A or the chat? I don't mind if they go in the chat either, that's fine. So I think the one that came earlier on the call, I'm guessing all images used on AI programs are okay to share and do not have copyrights. Great question. Not necessarily the case. It depends a lot on 2 things. One, the T's and C's of the tool. Many of the tools that we use will explicitly say that you own all of the copyright, but not all of them do. So you need to make sure you've checked. If you're going to start using these images, you need to make sure that you've checked that that from the purposes of the tool, it doesn't own it, you do. That would be the case with most of the major ones. That's the first thing it depends on. The second thing it depends on is there is, of course, and probably will be for the next 5 years or so, a bunch of stuff, legal cases, navigating their ways through the courts about whether or not the training input data that's being used here in the image generation in particular is being respected vis-a-vis copyright. And I think, you know, it's one of the reasons why I don't focus very heavily on the image generation side. I'm personally still slightly anxious about how you could ever be confident that an image it's generated was not visually very similar to, or obviously a copy of something it's been trained on. Really, really hard to kind of search and compare. So I would say if you're building quite generic images, like, you know, you're feeding it images and asking it to tweak it, that stuff's fine. I think if you're asking it to come up with things essentially from scratch, you are taking a bit of a risk. It might be lifting some stuff that might itself be under copyright. So whilst it won't belong to the generator, it might belong to somebody else. And that's my concern around a lot of this technology for image generation at the moment. That might become clearer over time, but right now I think it's a little bit unclear. So there is a question about GDPR and implications of using data in this way. I'm going to say, like, blanket answer to the GDPR question, generally speaking, is you need to tell people if this is something that you're going to start to do. So if you are using, and when I say tell people, it needs to go in the privacy policy. It needs to be really clear. That needs to be communicated to people in the same way you probably currently would. By the way, if you're using consent, even if you're using a legitimate interest basis, you should absolutely make sure you include the use case of these tools. So if you start putting personal data into tools like ChatGPT without there being any line anywhere that says we might be putting your data into tools like ChatGPT, you are almost certainly not being compliant. So you'll see that a number of the use cases, or most of the use cases I've come up with, have been not talking about a very specific individual, but there are some in there that are. So notes from a call, for example. Now, notes from a call are often easy to obfuscate, to essentially to anonymize, to take the individual data out of, if you want to. But I would say that much like any of the other uses of personal data, if you're doing stuff like wealth screening, or you're doing stuff around even just building profiles, anybody that uses things like Experian, things like data updating for telephone campaigns, like any of that kind of use, you probably already have it in your privacy policy that you're doing it. And I would suggest putting these kind of, and we may use we may use these tools if you're thinking about actually putting data in there. I would say though, for the most part, you don't really need to put very much PII in these tools for the use cases that I'm talking about. Now, there's another question. In observation, a major gift fundraisers using these AI tools as effective as fundraisers running appeals. Don't know. It's far too early in my experience. I mean, to comment on that. In my experience, one of the reasons why we've got this brand new centre at York is to study questions like this. I don't mean to dismiss the question at all. It's a great one. I think it's going to take 5 or 10 years for us to figure out, where these tools have a real impact. And what the biggest difference is, where can we essentially feel like we're being empowered to do our work better, rather than slowed down by new things we have to learn. But yeah, I mean, I would say that that these are not going to be, this data is not going to be available for a while. I mean, and if you look, for example, there was in particular in the US, for the last 7 or 8 years, there's been Gravity, the company Gravity, that that built software to help major donors write slightly better emails in many cases, and many people bought into it. I know some use cases were very strong. I think, of course, these days you've got tools like ChatGPT, which many people are using to help write better emails anyway. But I think there's a really interesting question there, right? So, like, does that tool actually help people write better emails? Or do we just think it's going to help people write better emails? If you sit there and think about it, and you think, what does that person really want? Versus if you get a prompt from a tool to fill something in. I don't know, like, how you guys are all finding the automatic email generation that comes with like Teams or Google if you've got it turned on. It's fine for one-line responses. It makes it some real mistakes if you've got complex emails to send. Just looking through questions. So there's a question about predictive analytics across the whole database. So I would say that I've not actually covered this very much on this talk at all. I think there's a huge use case for using AI tools, machine learning tools in particular, for doing some really interesting analysis of data across a whole database. I think that what we have at the moment, for what it's worth, these large language models are not the ones I've covered here. They're not the right tools to use for that kind of thing. I have given a few talks about this previously, and my worry with fairly deep analyses of data is data quality. So when we do complex analyses of things like predictive models or building predictive models, we have to be really sensitive to past historical biases. So things like the people that we've asked, the manner we've asked them, the regularity of the ask, the interactions with them, they all bias the result. And we don't always code that either categorically or numerically into our data. So, essentially the biggest predictor of whether somebody gives is whether you've asked them, as well as the intensity and the tone of the ask, right? But if you only encode that as a binary, as a did we ask them or not the strength of the ask, the regularity of the ask, then you miss all that nuance, and then you end up finding a predictive model isn't doing anything other than tell you what you already thought you knew, which is the people who are a little bit older tend to give, and they tend to give a little bit more. So my advice, if you're thinking about getting started in this, is look for tools that are tailored for this specifically. But if you're not a stats, essentially, if you are not a trained statistician, you probably want to engage with a company that knows how to run those kind of analyses, because there are companies that are experts at building predictive models out of tools. I don't feel like the tools are ready to do that yet. So I'm conscious we've got another question. How can you ensure your institution maintains authenticity when using these tools? It's a great question. I think really the answer to that is that you're not going to know how this stuff is going to be received until you start putting it out there. All right. So that doesn't mean, by the way, go and write something with ChatGPT and then send it to 10,000 people. The way I like to do this is I like to pick off small audiences that I can test things with first. So to get something, your case for or maybe your next newsletter, for example, that's going to go out, and have one of these tools rewrite part of your newsletter or rewrite all of your newsletter in a way that's relevant for a particular segment, and then take a small part of that segment and send them the new version, send them the bit that was written and personalized for them. If you do that, what you'll get is an A/B test. You'll get the people that got the general newsletter, and you get the people that got the slightly new one, the customized one. And what you then have is a perfect example of an experiment you ran to see, was it, did it improve engagement? Did anybody complain about it? Did anybody think it wasn't real or authentic? Because remember, all this tool is doing is taking what you give it. So it's not inauthentic. It's literally reflecting your own authenticity. So there's no reason why it wouldn't produce something that is as good, if not in some cases better, than what a human can produce. But again, for me, the acid test is the donor. It's the individual. It's got to be given to people before we know whether it really has landed. Okay, I'm very mindful of time. Can't see any other questions. I think I've answered the ones in the chat. Look, AI@hubbub.net, if you're interested in being part of this growing community. I really appreciate you all joining today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day and a wonderful weekend when it arrives. Thanks very much.